Well, I'm assuming you are in Job 35, and we're going to briefly look at these final words of Elihu to Job, and then, God willing, next Sunday night we will look at God's first speech to Job, the next week his second speech, and then we'll conclude the third week with an exposition of chapter 42. But all of this tonight is important because what's happening here is Elihu is actually preparing Job to meet the Lord. One of the interpretive challenges of the book of Job is kind of hearing the tone of those who are speaking. It's pretty easy when you're reading about Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar to read their tone, which is quite harsh, simplistic, sometimes self-righteous. When it comes to Elihu, it's a little bit more of a challenge. As I said last week, the majority view is that Elihu is actually saying nothing different than the other three friends. I think that's wrong. I think Elihu is approaching this very differently. And I'm not alone in that view. I think that Elihu, whereas the friends are saying, Job, you are suffering because of your sin, Elihu takes another track and he says, here's the challenge he wants to give to Job, is that in your suffering you are sinning. And you can see the difference there, right? He's not suffering because of his sin, but in his suffering he now is having unworthy words about God. He is questioning God's commitment to justice. He actually, several times, basically says that God is a tyrant, the way that he is treating him. And Elihu, who's a young man, is stirred by that. And with a great sense of righteous indignation, he withholds himself for several chapters, and then he just must speak. He allows these older men to speak first, and then he speaks, and as we saw last week, he burned with anger 4 times. We read that phrase. He was not an angry young man. He was a young man who was angry. And he was a young man who I think was angry because he has a high view of God. And so, therefore, he speaks because he's concerned about the way that Job is speaking about God. And I think it's important to understand that. So, when we read chapters 35, 36, and 37, we need to read it with that kind of a tone in mind. He's not coming at Job. He's not attacking Job, as in a sense his friends were, but he's coming alongside saying, Job, please hear me, because what you're saying about God is not right. It's not true, and it's going to be harmful to your relationship with him. So in all of this, what he's doing is preparing Job to meet God. In fact, at the end of chapter 37, it's as though the clouds have broken, the sky is clear, and now God is going to speak in chapter 38 to Job and begin to set matters right. So tonight, we're going to just briefly look at these 3 chapters and a very simple outline. I have some sub-points I'll give you as we go through this, but the first one is Elihu's conviction, and read about that in chapter 35, verses 1 to 16. Elihu's conviction. Elihu speaks under the conviction that Job has spoken irreverently, accusing God of being an unjust tyrant, and he's not heartlessly condemning Job, but rather he is hopefully helping Job to see the folly of his unworthy views and words about God. And I would just say that makes him a true friend. I think that a true friend comes along and helps you to see the truth. One of my favorite clips on YouTube is R.C. Sproul at a conference many, many years ago, and somebody asked the question, if God is slow to anger and full of steadfast love, why did he so harshly judge Adam and Eve when they sinned? And R.C. Sproul begins to explain that. And he says, let me put this in perspective. And he said, here is man who is created from the dust, defying holy God, who has given to man everything he needs. And then Sproul says, "What's wrong with you people?" And everybody starts laughing. He says, "I'm serious." He said, that's the problem with Christianity today. We don't understand the holiness of God. And I don't come away from that clip saying that R.C. Sproul was in a bad mood. I came away saying there was righteous indignation, and it was a wake-up call and helpful for me. That's what Elihu is doing here. And so he says in chapter 25, he reminds Job in verses 1 to 8 about God's sovereign independence. And in what he's saying to Job in these opening verses is not that God doesn't care if people do righteousness or whether they do wickedness. What he's saying is that God is so high above us, God doesn't need us to do right to make his day. And if we do wrong, that's not going to ruin God's day. He is saying that God is sovereign and independent. In Job, you need to see this. You need to humble yourself and see something about the greatness of this sovereign God. In verses 9 to 14 of chapter 35, he speaks about the fact that God is gracious to hear prayers, but he also goes on and says, well, look at verse 9, because of the multitude of oppression, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But, he says, none says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens? There they cry out, but he does not answer, because of the pride of evil men. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him? And what he is saying here in these verses is that oftentimes mankind will cry out to God when things are going bad, but when things are going swimmingly, they just ignore God. They're sinfully indifferent to him. He's also implying here that in the midst of Job's pain, that perhaps Job is crying out by shaking a fist at God instead of crying out in humble prayer, Lord, help me. Lord, teach me. And he warns Job in verses 15 and 16 of silly or stupid insolence. He says, and now, because his anger does not punish, and he does not take much note of transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. And what Elihu is pointing out here is, Job, you are sinning with your mouth. That because God has not worked in your life the way that you would like for him to, you are saying things that are empty. You are saying words that are without knowledge. You are speaking unrighteously about God. And as I thought about that this week, sometimes we can begin a trial very, very well, but as it lengthens, we tend to not do so well. We've seen that with Job. Job begins by saying, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. But over time, the pain is so deep, and he begins to say things about God that are unworthy. And we want to be careful that we don't sit back self-righteously and condemn Job, but he certainly is wrong in doing that. We can all learn from that as our pain sometimes increases in our trials, to guard ourselves about the things we say and think about God. Elihu is going to take this to another level in chapters 36 and 37, which is his final speech. And he's going to share with Job his comprehension in chapter 36 of who God is. Elihu, I don't know how young he is. We know he's younger than the other friends, but he does have the insight to see that God has a cosmic power that alone can bring about cosmic justice. Job is blinded by his pain. He can't see what God is doing. And of course, Elihu doesn't know all that God is doing either, but Elihu does know that God has enough power to sort things out in his timing and in his way. And in chapter 36, Elihu's goal is to help Job to appreciate that God does reward the righteous eventually, and that he does punish the wicked eventually, but that, again, it's in God's timing. Elihu comprehends that God is just, that God does work out his justice, but according to his timing. In verses 1 to 16 of chapter 36, we have Elihu's wisdom. Elihu has been criticized for being arrogant. I think that's false. In verse 1, and Elihu continued and said, "Bear with me a little, and I will show you, for I have yet something to say on God's behalf. I will get my knowledge from afar." That phrase in the Old Testament almost always speaks of the heavenly realm. So again, as we saw last week, Elihu is actually speaking under inspiration. He's speaking truth. "I will ascribe righteousness or justice to my Maker." Job, you've been ascribing unrighteousness to him, but I'm speaking truth, and I'm going to ascribe righteousness to him. "For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you." Now, if I was to say to you, one who is perfect in knowledge is with you, you might say, But don't read our context into this. This is simply Job's way of saying, I'm speaking truth. I'm speaking truth that I've gotten from the heavenly realm. This is truth that comes from God. In these verses, he speaks about God's power. He speaks about the fact that God uses power to care for people. In verses 5 to 7, "Behold, God is mighty and does not despise any. He is mighty in strength of understanding. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous, but with the kings on the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted." That God uses his power to establish, to care for people, and to do good through government. In verses 8 to 10, he speaks about God's power, God using his power for wise discipline. And if they are bound in chains and caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. He opens their ears to instruction and commands that they return from iniquity. In other words, God sometimes brings chastening to a people in order to open their eyes to wisdom, to the fear of the Lord. But he says that there's a couple of different responses to God's chastening. He says if they listen and serve him, they complete their days in prosperity and their years in pleasantness. But if they do not listen, they perish by the sword and die without knowledge. The godless in heart cherish anger. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life ends among the cult prostitutes. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. He's contrasting two responses. In some responses, when the affliction comes, people dig their heels in and they go deeper into sin. But there are those that are afflicted, and through that affliction, God actually delivers them. He opens, I love verse 15, he opens their ear by adversity. Somebody has called this the adversity gospel. The good news that God uses adversity to open our ears and to open our eyes and to teach us. You think about the prodigal son. In that story, the prodigal son, he goes and he lives in riotous living. And in all the struggles that he has as he's eating the husk of the swine, God uses that in order to bring him to repentance. And I think what Elihu is saying to Job here, again, he's not saying you're suffering because of your sin. He is saying in the midst of your suffering, God is opening your ears. And as we're going to see in the following chapters, God's going to open his eyes to see the Lord. When we are undergoing trials, it's hard for us to embrace this truth, but we need to realize these words are coming from afar. And that the Bible does teach indeed that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And in our affliction, the Lord opens our ears. I love Psalm 119 over and over again, one way or the other. You read these kind of phrases. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. In other words, the affliction was used of God to bring the writer of Psalm 119 to a closer relationship with him. That's the whole goal of the trial of Job. In verses 17 to 23 of chapter 36, we have Elihu's warning. He says to Job, rather than you right now at least opening your ears through this adversity and learning you're in a dangerous place, Job, you're full of the judgment on the wicked, judgment and justice sees you. And I don't have time to obviously expound all these verses, but here's the point that he's making. He's saying that, Job, you're in a dangerous spot because right now you're obsessed with justice. Is it Micah 6:8 that says that we are to love mercy and do justly and walk humbly with our God? Here's the danger. The danger is we love justice. That exhortation is to love mercy. When we become obsessed with justice, we are opening ourselves to a path towards bitterness because we're not going to see justice in this lifetime. Job is struggling with this. He sees the wicked prospering. In fact, you could write next to this Psalm 73, where Asaph writes about the same thing, that he saw the wicked prospering and it troubled him because he became obsessed with it and it just seemed so unjust. When we're going through trials, we need to heed the warning. We need to be careful to not be judging God by our circumstances, but as Elihu comprehends, understanding that God has cosmic power and he alone can bring about his justice, but he does it in his time. This all works towards Elihu's worship, which begins in verse 24, and for all practical purposes runs all the way through chapter 37, though I've divided it up differently. We have Elihu worshiping. Look at verse 24. Remember, he says to Job, rather than be obsessed with justice, remember to extol, to praise his work of which men have sung. All mankind has looked on it. Man beholds it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years is unsearchable, for he draws up the drops of water. They distill his mist in rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thunderings of his pavilion? Behold, he scatters his lightning about him and covers the roots of the sea. For by these he judges peoples. He gives food in abundance. That's interesting. The storms judge some people, but they also bring about food. He covers his hands with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. Its crashing declares his presence. The cattle also declare that he rises. Elihu is saying, listen, our God is great. And I think he's implying here, and God's going to actually back this up when he speaks to Job. He's going to say, Job, if you can't figure out the weather, why are you trying to figure out how God's going to bring about justice? I have a weather app that for the most part is useless. It's a good guess. I mean, I've looked at that weather app when the clouds have burst and it's pouring down rain, and my weather app says sunny. If we can't even predict the weather, why do we think that we have it all figured out how God should bring about justice? There's a humble call here for worship as Elihu speaks about his own worship of God. I love verse 31 when he speaks about these rains, that sometimes by the storms he judges peoples, but he also gives food. The same rain that can bring about destruction also brings about food on our table. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? The floods that bring about, I just read last night about floods in America in the 1920s that just flooded millions and millions of square miles of the Mississippi Basin, and how homes were destroyed, and yet it also led to some of the greatest crops for years afterwards. God has the ability to take something that's destructive and also use it for building up. In chapter 37, he pretty much brings to a conclusion his words about the worship of God, and he carries on the same thing. At this also my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. He's worshiping God. He says, listen, Job, keep listening to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that comes from his mouth. Under the whole heaven, he lets it go, and his lightning to the corners of the earth. After it, his voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightnings when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. He does great things that you cannot comprehend. And the storms tell us that God is involved in this world. I shared with you a couple weeks ago about Jeremy Rennie, a pastor that I am acquainted with, who lost everything in the hurricane in Florida a couple of weeks ago. He sent a letter out this week. He said he went back to his house with some friends to take pictures of all the possessions for insurance purposes. He said he went down into the basement of his home, and he found a box that had been totally sealed up of one of his children's mementos. And it was above the flood line. And he was thrilled to have, he said it was like an ark in the midst of the storm. He said, I picked it up, and as I walked out, I tripped and fell, and it all went in the mud and was ruined. But he went on to say that even in the midst of this storm, he realizes that he has God. There are things that happen in our lives that are inexplicable. And yet Elihu wants Job to worship. He wants Job to realize that this great God is inescapable. Verses 1 to 13. He wants Job to remember that this great God is indescribable. Verses 14 to 18. Hear this, O Job. Stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Do you know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? You whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind, can you, like him, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror? And the answer is no. These rhetorical questions are all being said by Elihu not to beat Job down, but to try to help Job to understand that God is greater than we can comprehend. And because he is greater than we can comprehend, we should be very slow to try to tell him how to rule the world. And I don't know about you, but I find myself tempted that way. And I think I know how it should all be worked out. But God, who is incomprehensible, he is the one who has cosmic power. He is the only one who can bring about cosmic justice. And that brings our friend Elihu to his last statement in verses 19 to 24, where he says, Job, God is irreproachable. He's saying this to Job. Teach us what we shall say to him. Job, you speak as though you have all the answers, but we cannot draw up our case because of darkness. Job, we're in the dark. We can't bring a lawsuit against God. Remember, Job has done that several times. Shall it be told him that I would speak? Did a man ever wish that he would be swallowed up? In other words, if you take on God, you are playing with your life. And then he says this, and now the mood changes. It's as though all this talk about thunder and lightning and storm, and he speaks about ice and snow earlier in chapter 37. But it's now all cleared. And now one looks on the light when it is bright in the skies. It's as though Elihu is looking up, saying, now the clouds are parting. The wind has passed and cleared them. And out of the north comes golden splendor. That was language used in mythology, speaking about where the gods came from. Elihu didn't believe that, but he's speaking contextually. He's saying that God is coming out. God is moving, and he's clothed with awesome majesty, the Almighty. We cannot find him. He is great in power, justice, and abundant righteousness. He will not violate. In other words, stop the reproach. Stop the criticism of God. Therefore, men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. And now Elihu's words are ended. And now, out of this clear sky, we're going to see next week the Lord answering Job out of that whirlwind. When I think about Elihu, I think about a man by the name of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was preparing for the way of the Lord. In many ways, that's what Elihu has done in chapters 32 to 37. He is preparing Job to now meet the Lord. He has spoken inspired truth. And I want to end with this observation, and I hope it will be helpful. And I don't want to be misunderstood. I hold to the view, as I said last week and this week, that Elihu is speaking truth. He's not condemning Job. He's helping Job, who's sinning in his suffering. And on at least 3 occasions, he's made very clear that he believes he is speaking the word of God, that he is speaking under inspiration. He is speaking this truth, but Job now has to experience this truth. He has to experience meeting with God. When we are counseling people, we need to use God's authoritative, completely sufficient word. Amen? God's word has the answers. God's word points us to him. But until the Spirit of God takes that word and makes a personal encounter between the counselee and God, you can speak until you're blue in the face and it won't make any difference. You can preach God's word until you are breathless, and we should do that in season and out of season. But realize it's not some magical saying these words. The Spirit of God must take this word and clear the skies and bring the counselee, to bring the individual to that encounter with God. For years I heard the gospel. For years I heard the word of God. But it was only one night on the February 11th of 1980 when all of a sudden all those words that, thank God, all those Elihus and all those John the Baptists in my life had spoken to me, God took those. He cleared the skies. And now there is this encounter with him and my life was changed. So as we're trying to help people, give them the word of God. But we must rely on the Spirit of God to take those words and to bring that individual to an encounter with God. And when God does that, then we're going to see, beginning next week, wonderful changes come about. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your inspired word that we can study and preach and teach and counsel with. We do pray, Lord, that we would be really weary about a mechanical approach to that. And realize, Lord, that unless you break open the clouds, unless you appear in the whirlwind, Lord, lives will not be touched. We pray that you would use us, and Lord, that you would help us to have those encounters with you. And those who are trying to help, that they would come to the end of themselves as Job did, and repent of unworthy views, and be transformed by your grace. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.